Hello and welcome to Conscious TV. I'm Iain McNay and my guest today is Jonathan Donahue. Hi Jonathan.
Hello.
And Jonathan is a musician. He's in a band called Mercury Rev and was in the band called The Flaming Lips. And we got in contact with each other about 8-9 years ago now. And our first meeting, he asked me about an interview I did many moons ago with someone called YuGiOh, not to be confused with J. Krishnamurti, completely different people. And there's not many people heard of YuGiOh, so I was quite impressed that Jonathan even knew about him. So how did you find out about YuGi in the first place? Do you remember?
Well, I remember finding about YuGi through Jiddu,
Right.
J. Krishnamurti, who was an Indian philosopher and quite extraordinary in his own arc, going through the years from the Theosophical Society and into later years as just almost a go-to of a very staunch realism throughout the spiritual world. And it was through learning about and reading J. Krishnamurti's work that I realized there was another Krishnamurti, an even more abstruse Krishnamurti, even more hardcore, if such a word can be used, in the spiritual New Age, all is one world, that YuGi, who also knew J. Krishnamurti as well.
They didn't get on very well.
No, but they both had a very persistent view of spirituality and how it should be managed on the inside. When a lot of their contemporaries, even in Indian philosophy and certainly in its translation into Western philosophy, were much more laissez-faire about how to deal with these things called spiritual greed and vanities of knowledge and things like that. Whereas the two Krishnamurtis themselves were always constantly warning about that sort of spiritual covetedness, about the idea of there's the magic types and there's the muggles. And YuGi himself opened my eyes to something that even I had no idea was possible. And that was the mistake of enlightenment.
He called it calamity.
Yeah.
He called it a calamity when he got in.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. And for a long time, it always was known as the mystique of enlightenment. Somehow this thing that happened to you, this piano that fell from some divine stage above us. And YuGi warned very strongly against this quest for something. And he said something that knocked me over completely and changed nearly every color in my Pantone collection. He said, the search must end before anything can happen. Totally contradictory to nearly every Western philosopher to come by in the past 100 years since Theosophy sort of broke in America in the late 1800s. Everyone else is saying, you've got to go on this search for the real you. You've got to find this enlightenment. You've got to attain this ascension. You have to do all these things. You've got to find your own mountaintop and go there. And it was YuGi that brought it, at least to my own understanding, that was actually the obstacle itself, was this desire for something outside of you. This idea of you can get something. And we all get that from the very beginning. You get a diploma, you get a job, you get married, you know.
That comes from the I. The I wants, and the I wants to be enlightened because it's special.
And this was a man, along with J. Krishnamurti as well, warning how cunning that I was. That there were not just one ego we thought walked around and said, I'm the best at this and that. We assumed it's just this one playing card. But there were so many other little ones that were so much more cunning, so much more sophisticated, so much more adaptable, almost like a virus, that could adapt to whatever you thought you were attacking in your own ego way. And they'd find a way to survive. And it was both Krishnamurtis, but it was especially YuGiOh, who really, he confronted me with something that at the time I was too stopped in my tracks to even defend myself against. And over time, I've come to glean a little bit more and a little bit more. Does it mean I've conquered it or? No, absolutely not. But I have a quite secure inkling that it's there now. Whereas before, I didn't know it was there when you're young.
Yeah, I spent 2 days with him many years ago. Obviously, he's dead now, but he was quite ruthless in his own way. He just didn't take any shit from anybody. He just seemed to do exactly what he wanted to do, but there wasn't necessarily a he that wanted it. It was just, he was completely spontaneous. And I remember somebody had lent me one of his books. He wrote 2 books, or books were written with his talking in it. He didn't actually physically write the books. And when I was in New York, I got his phone number and I rang him up. And I'd heard that sometimes people ring him up and he just almost swears at them, says, "Go away, I don't want to see you." I just said, "I'd like to come and see you, meet you." And he was okay, so we agreed a time and I went round there with Renata, my wife, and it was strange because I rang the bell, somebody opens the door, like this old Indian woman opens the door, and I walked past looking for YuGiOh, and I realised the person that opened the door was him. And I think he quite liked the fact I didn't know who he was. And we just had, I don't know, fun for 2 or 3 hours, and he was just himself. And he used to say that whenever he left a place, he was staying, he seemed to have women around the world that were quite wealthy that liked him. There was nothing sexually happening between them. He's just they liked him and they liked his teaching and they helped look after him. And he told me that when he was leaving New York in a few days, he would leave everything behind, all his money, and he would just have clothes that he wore. He'd have a ticket to somewhere else, then he'd arrive somewhere else with no money. And that's how he lived.
Yeah. And
there was, as you said, there was something about no attachment. And when he talked about what happened to him, which was his enlightenment, inverted commas, he calls it his calamity.
Yeah.
Because after that, for 2 years, he was living not far from here, under the arches at Charing Cross Station. He was homeless. He had no money. He'd lost his perspective in life. And it took him time to find any kind of way of surviving. He was a beggar on the streets, and he just, for me, he was kind of a great example of complete letting go.
Yeah.
And in that complete letting go, there's no structure holding you together. And that's right, nearly all of us, we seek, and there's nothing wrong with seeking, but will seeking take you to your destination or your perceived destination? Because actually the destination has got nothing to do, as you said, with the journey. It's only the journey.
No, that is my understanding of the eyes, of the gross ego, is that there's something outside of you in relation to you. It's that separation. And to me, the Enlightenment, when you first get into spiritualism or theosophy or Gnosticism, you feel it's this attainable yet somehow distant goal that, someday, if I do enough, Om Shantis, I'm going to be a part of this Enlightenment club, like the Mile High Club or something. And after a while, if you penetrate deep enough, you hit that point that I think YuGiOh was trying to sternly make, and YuGiOh was making as well, perhaps with a little more cushion than even YuGiOh was, that you have to be ultra vigilant about the very idea that it's something you can get. And I think one of YuGiOh's, not that I was a documentary on him or something like that, but I think YuGiOh was trying to make the case that it's something that arises in you. nearly spontaneously, and without some calculated part on you to read enough books or to go to too many gurus and to sit in too many positions, that it was automatically going to happen. And to me, the enlightenment itself, it can feel initially like the dark night of the soul that they speak of, like a catastrophe. Because when you realize what enlightenment is, it's ultimate responsibility. It's like being a mother, not just of your child, not of your brother, not even of your local circle of friends. It's being responsible for every single sentient being on earth. That's what a Buddha is. It's a Buddha nature that is responsible for every single creature. Now, most of us, including myself, you can't even imagine being wholly responsible for yourself. Not even in your clearest moment, let alone your girlfriend, your boyfriend, your son, your mother. Imagine being wholly responsible and wholly compassionate and wholly in love with every single person on earth, or being, whatever you want to call it. That knocked me over like a ton of bricks. Did I want this thing? Who would want this thing? Who could handle this kind of a thing?
Well, you don't handle it because it destroys you.
My gosh. You know? And that really gave me pause. And no matter what else you can read in spiritualism or in any of the sort of perennial traditions, you still are faced with this ultimate one truth. Are you willing to be responsible for everything?
Well,
and not in a way that says you are making every reality happen, but in a way that says whatever reality is happening, will you be open to it? Will you have a compassion towards it? Even if it's not directly manifested by yourself. It's an overwhelming proposition, you know?
But I think what happened with YuGiOh, and we don't know, I would like to personalize this more in a minute, but was that everything fell apart with his personality, because so there wasn't really an element of him left to feel, I feel responsible. And I did an interview with someone I've known for a long time recently, a guy called Jez Albra, and he was a very successful author, children's books. He sold over 8 million books, really successful. And then over a period of time, his personality just disintegrated, and there was one particularly dramatic time when he was driving to the West Country, stopped at a service station, and could not get himself together at all. And of course he ended up in a complete mess as a human being for many, many years, until he started to not so much rebuild the personality, but allow more stability to emerge. And that's what happened to YuGiOh, I think, that his personality crashed.
Ultimately it would have to, because all the little egos would say, oh, okay, I'll take care of this. Yeah. I will take care of this people, this people, this people. That's still the ego talking, saying, I'll be responsible then. But until you sort of have this deeper, I guess, impersonal connection to everything and everyone as yourself, you can't get to there, you know? And I can speak to what you're talking about with the personality crash, because that happened to me in my writing, is when you go deep into this far enough, all that sentiment of baby, 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 I love you, I love you, I love you, in songwriting, all that, I'll call it, that whipped up man-made drama, it gets burned out of you. And as a songwriter, it can leave you quite speechless, because you say, oh, all these little soap operas I used to write about, all these little fantasized little moments I would lyrically try to encapsulate. No, I'm not interested in that. I have no real connection to these little dramas I was making. It doesn't make me better. It simply made me really quiet. And it did affect the way I approached lyrics after a certain point in albums. It absolutely changed, where I wasn't willing to just indulge in these little romantic fantasies, because I didn't feel that.
So just to give this some kind of reference point, so your third album, See You on the Other Side, you put a lot into that, and it didn't do well sales-wise, and that was quite devastating for you.
Not the sales, I should say. It was just it didn't seem to find anyone's ears, and maybe even not even ears, into the heart.
So there was no appreciation, basically. Is that right?
It just didn't feel like anyone had received the transmission.
Yes.
It felt like being on an island and you were trying to dial in the one army base to rescue you, and you missed the frequency.
And then the response in you initially was to blame the outside, I think you told me when we talked.
I think that was the initial response, was to say, it wasn't to blame them, it was to feel that almost I'll speak for only myself, that somehow I was inadequate. I hadn't met a threshold.
The standard.
I had walked into a bar thinking I was wearing my best, and I had my Sunday best on, and everyone just shrugged.
Yes.
It wasn't their fault by any means. It was just that feeling of momentary worthlessness. It wasn't real. It was just phantoms in my own mind. But at the time, it seemed physical to me. It seemed visceral.
And what was the process in you, if you remember at the time, to take you beneath that, so you could start to see that the problem was rooted within rather than...
Somehow the lamp went on.
The lamp went on. So something else...
Yeah.
You let go of something else...
Something must have either stopped a wind and allowed the candle to flicker, or sparked it. I don't have an answer to why the lantern was lit when it was. I'm grateful it did. I don't have anything to ascribe it to other than it went on. Maybe a growing weariness of my own dissatisfaction reached some sort of a critical temperature that ignited it, But I can assuredly say that at the time I didn't have any inkling. I didn't have any greater spiritual insight or moment of realization. It just was on, when it felt like it hadn't been.
And once it was on, it produced light where there wasn't light before, and you could see, and you started to read and study, and...
I'm pretty sure that's the way it went. But at the time, I still didn't have the lexicon in the way that we're talking now of all the Krishnamurti and the philosophies and traditions. I had none of that. So it was really just holding a little match up to the cave and saying, well, it looks like I can go a little further in this direction before I hit a rock,
So it was small steps at a time, really.
Yeah, very small steps. I'm sure it's very small steps now, I'd like to say I was responsible for the lantern going on. I'd like to say all these heavy, deep things that occurred to me and I figured out. But at the time, I didn't. I was lost, and I admit it.
Yeah. And so you've already talked a little bit about how that affected your music, lyrically affected.
It affected my life, and therefore it would affect the lyric. It took this part of me out, this constant blender going on of drama. And we all have those little whirlpools in us, but in my case, it had to do with sort of a lyrical perspective that I was no longer felt close to.
And musically, did you feel that the music you were writing was different as well?
If I'm honest, I probably overcompensated a bit with the romance of the music.
Yeah, so the drama of the music.
Yes. to
Yeah.
fill in where the words no longer were. And maybe that's part of that romantic notion of songs on deserter songs, was that once that little whirlpool stopped or whatever happened to it, maybe I was trying to fill it with more romantical sweeps.
Because you used orchestra for the first time, didn't you, on that album?
For the first time, we used more orchestration than
yeah.
rock
Yeah.
orientation. Yeah, the balance was very tipped on that record.
Yeah.
Now speaking to you, yeah, I probably did. I was probably trying to just balance the hull that I felt had lilted to this side, and the whole ship was just leaning so far over, like one of those racing yachts, you know. And so maybe all the childhood children's records I love with the oboes and the narration and those fairy tale little musical moments, it quite possibly could have been trying to fill that space that in me was just hollowed out, you know.
Did you doubt the lantern at all?
I think I was just so desperate or despairing that I didn't see it as a way. I just felt myself going there out of thirst for water.
Yes.
You just start digging in this dune without any dowsing or any machine to tell you there's water 2 feet below. You just start digging,
Yeah.
you know, like it's the last thing you're going to do, you know. And I'd like to ascribe a lot more confidence to myself and to deserter songs in particular, which people know, or to my music, but a lot of it was just scratching in the dirt, you know. Just not happenstance, but almost just out of a really overwhelming thirst, you know. You're not thinking, you're too thirsty to think.
Yeah, and also you were saying like there was a space created, a hollow was there.
Yeah, and over time I could surrender to letting it fill itself, but when you're young in the game of this, in a way, you just look to something else, you know, and it was, you know, the whole, we'll use the word spiritual. I'm not a great fan of that word, but we'll use it in my case, that it was something that turned on to my own understanding in me of its own accord, of its own intent. And I've done whatever I can to shield it from the winds of what little egos seek to snuff it out. And I'm always missing some because there's so many little ones that are just so smart, you know.
Did you, at that time, if you remember, did you feel less of yourself or more of yourself? I don't mean...
I've felt less of myself since then.
Yeah.
Diminishingly
So the
less.
structure, the one that's defined as Jonathan, starts to drop away.
The closer I look, the more uncertain I became.
Mm.
I'm okay with it now. I wasn't for a long time. Because you're wholly associating yourself with those movements, you know. And when the movement slows down a bit more, it takes a little time to still understand that there's a worthiness. It's like a Formula One driver who's always used to driving 180, and then he has to drive just to the grocery store. And he would naturally question, like, am I still that really great Mario Andretti, even though I'm going 45 to the 7-Eleven? And you have to have a patience there, and you have to have some grace. And by that I mean something you're grateful for, but you can't ascribe to yourself or to just yourself, you know. I I don't know. I think that's the part I'm enamored with the most, is I don't always have any idea what's going on in me, you know. And the moment I do, I start thinking about YuGiOh and J. Krishnamurti, because then I start recognizing these little Jonathans, you know, putting their little Napoleon caps on again.
Yeah.
And I get a bit more vigilant, you know. And it's a balance, it's a challenge, you know. I lose more than I win of these little battles. But I do what I can to get up and try to meet them each day, you know. That's where that mistake of enlightenment, you know, really confronted me, you know. It also liberated me from this white cloud of bliss that, you know, everyone wants to sort of jump into, not recognizing the simple fact it's a cloud, you'll fall through it again, and you'll be back in reality and expected to take responsibility for your own actions and to be kind and compassionate. If you can do those three things, Buddhahood is assured, you know. But apart from those three things, I don't think there's anything else I've stumbled on through my years that's going to get you there, you know.
So musically, would you say now that we talked in the earlier interview about the universe, the absolute, using you as a vehicle, not so much using you, but you are the vehicle. Would you say that is kind of more and more the case, that you feel that something's coming through you rather than this is Jonathan thinking or writing this lyric, that there's a happening and you are somehow involved in the happening?
Yeah, what you say. I think there's a song I know for certain on our last record called Autumn's in the Air, where it's
a lovely song. I remember that
me
song,
describing exactly what we're talking about in the best way I could. Almost parts of me disappearing like a bicycle left chained that you walk past every morning, and each morning the front wheel's been stolen. And then the seat's been stolen until there's only just the bare frame still locked to the stop sign. Yeah. And that's the way it's been feeling to me through the years, and it keeps going. I know, you know, maybe some fans don't want to hear that, but I am disappearing. You know, it's not that I'm growing into something I'm trying to sort of build up. I feel I'm disappearing a bit, and that's okay.
Does that make you feel lighter? Your emotions
once in a while, sometimes it's hard to stand up, you know. It's both, you know. I'd like to say, I'm taking it all in stride, and I'm, you know, somehow like Jack Nicholson in The Shining, I'm much better now. But I can't say that. I can only say that it's going on in me. And we made a number of records, and I've written lots of records about nature, and people thought, why are you always writing about the birds and the snakes and the streams? And this stuff goes on in me. I don't have any other words, vocabulary to describe it. But that's what's happening. I can't say it's happening to anyone else. I can't say it's better than what's happened to anyone else. I just say that's what's happening to me. But the more I go into some of the traditions, I notice it has happened to other people in the past. I'm not alone in this, if there's any consolation.
No, you're far from being alone, yeah. There was one thing you said to me on the phone when we talked yesterday, which I wrote down here, which I wanted to ask you to talk about briefly. So with Mercury Rev, the band, you feel that it's a vehicle for attracting experience.
Yes. I think any art in particular, but anyone's walk of life, it's not about the product itself. It's not about the song. It's not about a light show. It's about the energies that it's not only attracting to you, but bringing up in your consciousness, or most importantly, especially in arts and entertainment, it's forcing you to acknowledge, and sometimes confront, it's sometimes to embrace situations, people that aren't on the outside. They're inner elements in you that are symbolized by experiences on the outside, by people that come and go in your life, by records of success or failure. These aren't on the outside. Nothing failed on the outside of See You on the Other Side. Nothing was greatly successful on the outside of Deserter Songs. But on the inside of me, it changed elements in me. It changed my perspective. Maybe, hopefully it expanded in some ways. Hopefully it abandoned other parts of me. And that, to me, was very freeing. Rather than assuming that Mercury Rev had to do something, that it had to accomplish something, that it had to be something. I've just noticed, for my own part, not speaking for Grasshopper, that everything that happens it's happening inside of me. The band is simply the car in some way. That
helps to express.
Yeah, that seemingly transports me to this episode, this event, this emotion. It's not to say that I'm not invested in Mercury Rev, but what I've noticed is that it's not the thing in it itself.
Yeah, you also said, I picked this up from a quote somewhere, that true creation comes from space.
The emptiness.
Yes.
That's not something goes over well in your youth. In your youth, you're looking to fill as many squares on the crossword musically as you possibly can when you're 18 years old. You see an empty square and it's almost abhorrent to you. Fill it. Put a symbol there. Put a feedback sound. Squall into a microphone. But for God's sakes, don't leave it open.
Yeah.
You know, and I don't mean just being a 3-piece band versus a 9-piece band, but just allowing the space to not fill itself, but to know that it's filled in and of itself already, you know. But when you're young, you know, I guess that is why so many first records are so incredibly unique in every band's career, is because it's that ratio of what they've left unfilled and what they were frustrated that they couldn't fill.
They're hungry for experience. They're hungry for success. They're
wide open channels. They're wide open. You know, youth has that strong magnetism. It just draws things from, you know, parsecs away.
Yeah. So you're also telling me that you were in a situation where your house was flooded and you lost most of your possessions. Was that something you kind of took in your stride okay, or was that I think that for a lot of people that's still very difficult when you just think it's the memories that are all going. I know it's another way of letting go, probably a superb, fast way of letting go, but it's still challenging on the human level.
Yeah, it had that moment, but that moment was really diminished, because I can remember I was living on the creek in upstate New York in the Catskills, and the hurricane was coming, and we had an inkling that the flood was going to be much bigger, and it ended up being the record flood for the recorded history. And many, many, many months before, my girlfriend had expressed to me, she said, you know, the only way you're going to leave this place is if some natural disaster levels it. And of course I was just laughing, like, what would possibly a snowstorm know? And sure enough, when the flood came, and you're just watching the brown waters rise, and you know, you could see some of the 2-inch tapes floating down the creek of Deserter Songs, just unspooling themselves. They look like little brown sort of snakes as they unspooled and the water's going down with your other stuff and other people's stuff as well.
And you watch and you
well, yeah,
feel
because we were up on the higher ground, for a little bit.
This is like the multi-track tapes of your most famous album, your most successful album. And we all know that with technology develops, more can always be done with historical things, and it's floating down the river. So that possibility is just gone.
Yeah, it was a little bit like something didn't click in me that I was losing anything.
Okay, yeah.
It just didn't come across like that. I remember driving away and I was smiling while the thunder and lightning was still happening and you couldn't get down Route 28 and the roads were closed and trees were falling. But I remember smiling. I don't know why, but it had that sense of being forcibly freed. Like I had clung too long to that moment, being in that space in the Catskills. And I was more than likely chuckling at my own arrogance, thinking I could stay there forever, that somehow there was some eternity that I could lock into living in this little place on the side of a creek, some ideal that I had. And there it was, something much bigger than me going, no. But something very visceral. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't something just you could perceive and sort of philosophize away. It was just, there was 23.5-foot floodwaters on a creek that usually is 4.5 feet deep. And I that was when you feel one of those great forces in the universe, the right hand of it.
Yeah. And you mentioned to me earlier when we were talking that patience and stillness, you mentioned them in the same sentence, still incredibly important to you, patience and stillness.
I'm fortunate that there's been a lot more grace in my life, especially musically, that's given me probably more patience than I have earned on my own.
Why do you feel you have to earn patience?
It's not a natural instinct.
I think it was, and I think we've lost it as in humanity.
Okay,
it was,
that would be a fair statement.
Yeah.
Okay, at the moment where most of us are, it's not a natural instinct. And I'm speaking creatively especially, And there's been times, especially I will say recently with the new release of this Bobby Gentry Revisited, where there was an incredible amount of patience looking back at certain elements of the recordings. I don't know where they came from. I would like to say that there was a trust and I had all these Om Shantis I recited before every recording, but it wasn't like that, And maybe those are good karmas expressing themselves from many lifetimes. Maybe it's just grace itself. I don't know. But I'm aware enough to say thanks. As corny and as vague and new age as that may sound, that's what works for me.
Yeah. Well, gratitude is not new age. Gratitude is intelligence. To be grateful for what you have. Yeah. I remember when I had an accident 18 months ago. I was hiking in the Dolomite Mountains, and I slipped and I fell, and I was rolling down the mountain. And my wife thought, "This is it. I'm gone." And I was rolling, but I got stopped by a pile of rocks. So I was lucky. I got stopped, and I was in some pain because I fractured my spine. I broke my shoulder, but actually, I was grateful I was alive, and that kind of gratitude stays with me every morning. I wake up, even though I might have a human issue about something. I'm grateful I didn't die, and I'm grateful that I wasn't permanently in a wheelchair or something. It's like
that gratitude. To me, it's something many people mistake as a platitude, as a sense of self-flattery or something. To me, I see gratitude as a force of nature, as in physics. It's something very real. It's not simply a human philosophy, that to me there's something quite tangible in sincere gratitude, not just patting yourself on the back or thanking your lucky stars or thanking your grandma because she gave you her stamp collection from the 60s. There's something very real about that sincere gratitude when you know in your heart you haven't earned it. Or maybe you had many, many lifetimes ago. I don't know. But you know that currently you didn't earn that. That either it's a result of past good behaviors, let's call it, or that you've been given an opportunity greater than what you've worked towards so far. And you don't want to blow that opportunity. That to me is the gratitude. It's saying there's some larger opportunity here. Please, Jonathan, focus for a moment. Don't let this slip away, even if you don't wholly understand it.
So the search has to end.
It does. It does. It's tricky and it's so hard. I'm just out there with everybody else, doing what you can. Is this a search? Is this not a search? I think I've done 3 searches today. Oh, that's 3 searches too many. You can get into all these little trickeries of it. But there's a truth there that it stayed with me, even if I don't fully know the truth myself, even if I've only glimpsed small little facets of the entire gem. I have an inkling it's true. The search must end before that liberation that all the great sages talk about happens to you, in you.
Yeah, I know you studied quantum physics quite a bit, and that explains it quite well, about there is no, on the energy level, there is nothing that is individual, there's nothing that tangibly has form.
The form that we see is the search. The matter is the search.
Yes.
The particle is the search. And so if you're looking to be that wave that all the great philosophers mention, that all the Poussins and Dalis and the great painters, that all the great writers from Whitman on back speak of, if you want that wave to be your self, then the search has to end. I'm out there with the rest of everyone, doing, I try to do the best I can, and try not to beat myself up too much.
And you live a life which is important as well. In the West we need to live a life. And you make marvellous music.
Thank you.
Are you happy most of the time?
Yes.
Yeah, that's wonderful. That's a good place to end, I think. So Jonathan, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you out there watching Conscious TV. And if you don't know the music of Jonathan's band Mercury Rev, then you want to start with Deserter Song, just a wonderful album. There's lots of wonderful albums, but that's a good starting point. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.